The pre-orders are up. We've seen the leaks. I've got the full scans here. I'm going to be going through the entire Arcane journal, the War of Settra's Fury. We're going to be looking at it piecemeal because there's a lot of different stuff in here. I just want to say, off the rip, my opinion on this, I'm relatively happy with what we're getting. I think the contents in this book is... The general response I've seen to it has not been overly hyped, and for the dwarf players, I'm sorry, I totally understand that. I think a lot of the stuff in this book is very good, and I'm very pleased to see it, and there's a lot to play around with. So we're going to break it down, but first of all, I want to talk about the Tomb Kings. Obviously, yesterday I had a video come out where I looked specifically at one unit from the new Renegade Crown's army, but my microphone is fixed, I'm back to normal, my voice is mostly, in one piece. So we're going to be looking at this, breaking it down fully, and we're going to start off with the Tomb Kings today. We'll bring you some more interesting stuff, probably the Renegade Crowns tomorrow, maybe finish off with the Dwarves on Tuesday. Who can say? Maybe I'll find more stuff that I want to talk about. This video is brought to you by the Close Order Coaching Patron. If you're interested in more information than you can get on a Fix My List, or you're looking to work on specific aspects of your game that maybe I haven't covered in a video, this is the place to do so. Coaching comes in two tiers, either a one-on-one, 1 hour chat where we can discuss list building, various aspects of your game, what you'd like to improve on, or a 3-hour coaching game where we can go more in depth onto certain aspects. Both tiers come with a personal Discord channel where you can ask me questions, get list advice, or just plan out what we want to address in the next session. If you have any questions, you can ask on the coaching section of the Close Order Discord, and you can book my time anywhere from 9 AM to 11 PM local time, depending on the day. The first thing to talk about is the character mounts. Now, this is the thing that I think most people are disappointed by. In the promotional post on last Sunday, so the week where they declare that they're going to be putting it on pre-order, but before it actually goes up for pre-order, they did say new monstrous mount options. And having talked to a couple of people who knew some bits and pieces, in previous versions of the list, maybe before it went to print, well, definitely before it went to print, there were other options in here that were played around with. So my expectation was we were getting a little bit more, and I am a little bit bummed not to get, for example, some sort of monstrous mount, or monstrous cavalry mount, being able to put a Tomb Prince BSB, for example, on one of the snakes whose name I was completely gone out of my mind. If that was something that you could do and put them in with a Shabti, I think that would have been very cool. And that was kind of what I was expecting when they were talking about this. However, not the case. What do we get instead? Well, we get a new Barded Skeleton Steed. This also doesn't do what I thought it was going to do. I thought they were going to reprint the Skeletal Steed and make that light cavalry and then have this one as heavy cavalry. But they're both heavy cavalry, so I'm not 100% sure what the point of this is. With that said, let's have a quick look at the new Barded Skeletal Steed. It's a skeleton horse. It's got Swift Stride Vanguard. Vanguard's quite nice. It's undead, obviously, and it comes with barding. So the normal skeletal steed doesn't come with barding. This does mean that it's easier to get a Tomb King or Tomb Prince to a better armor save if you're looking at running around and maybe doing some sort of lone character shenanigans and just having some sort of beater on a steed. I don't know that there's a build in there that I'm super excited about, but maybe it's something that we should look at. Yeah, I'm not sure. You can also just get a 6-up armor save on your High Priest or your Mortuary Priest. Sure, I'm not super opposed to that. It might make a small difference, but here we are. We've got a 4-point difference between the steed and the skeletal steed. Not much to talk about. Let's move on. Next up, we've got the winged Warsphinx, which I thought might come in as a mount option, and that was something that I was a little bit more excited about. However, it's not an option. It is just something that you can take, I believe, in the Grand Army. Yes. Grand Army or Mortuary Cult can have 0 to 1 Winged Warsphinx per 1,000 points as a rare choice, which is fine. But when we're looking at it as purely a rare choice option, we're comparing it to the Necrosphinx. The Necrosphinx is obviously very, very good. It's got Killing Blow on all of its attacks. It's got Killing Blow and Monster Slayer on that single Strength 10 AP4 attack. So, very solid piece there. Whereas the Winged Warsphinx, it's a little bit more consistent. Its Wicked Claws are AP2. So all of its attacks are Strength 5 AP2, whereas the Necrosphinx has some AP1 attacks, if I'm remembering correctly there. You can pay to give it an Envenom Sting, which I wouldn't bother. Even though it's only 5 points, it's just a worse weapon, but you get strikes first. You can pay to give it a Breath Weapon, which is a little bit better in 1.5, where we are seeing larger units of infantry, but I still don't think it's something that I'm particularly interested in going for. And then statline-wise, it's relatively similar to the Necrosphinx? Yes, Necrosphinx. But it is just a little bit worse across the board. In fact, let me pull up that stat line. We can compare them one-to-one. Looking at the Necrosphinx, we can see that for only 15 points more, on the base stats, you get +1, sorry, not 1 strength, +1 wound, and +1 attack. Now, that's quite a big difference. When you're going from 4 to 5 attacks, you're getting, 25% more value, and 5 to 6 wounds, you're getting 20% more wounds. But this is compounded because the Warsphinx only has a 6-up regen here, whereas the Necrosphinx has a 5-up regen. So, in effect, it has even more wounds compounding on the more wounds and the regen save, meaning that you get more effect out of those wounds as well. The stomp attacks are also better for the Necrosphinx, which is D3 plus 2 as opposed to just a standard D3. Both of them are behemoths, so still got the AP on the stomps there, but otherwise just a little bit underwhelming. For 15 points, you're losing quite a lot on the Winged Warsphinx. Now, there is one thing that you might take this for that you don't get on the Necrosphinx, and that is that the Winged Warsphinx, I'm saying Sphinx so often that I'm losing the ability to differentiate. The Winged Warsphinx has countercharge. That's pretty good. That is pretty solid. So it's not something I'm... you're not countercharging dragons, and if you're countercharging into knights, you'll probably win, but they might take the pound of flesh out of you. If we're talking something like Chaos Knights, the frontage there, they're going to be hitting you on 3s, wounding you on 4s. That is maybe a little bit concerning. But into lighter targets, maybe Empire. Obviously, we've got a new Empire-ish army that's just come into the game with Renegade Crowns, Bretonnians, Elves. Those sorts of armies, being able to countercharge is quite nice. That is solid. Into Chariots as well. So there is a little bit of an angle where you might want to go for the Warsphinx. Or the other angle you might want to go for is that maybe you just like the model more and you wanted to do something different. I think Tomb Kings are such a strong army that you can make choices like this and say, I'm deliberately putting the Winged Warsphinx in because I think it's cool, and I don't think that's going to massively affect how good my army is. Will it be a little bit worse? Yes. Will it be so much worse that it's a problem to me winning games? Probably not all that much. So, Winged Warsphinx has one angle to play it, which is the countercharge. Other than that, I'm not super jazzed by it. I understand that I started this video off by saying I'm actually pretty happy with what Undead get. I've got the stuff that I'm less happy about out of the way. So let's move on to the stuff that I think is actually interesting and exciting. Sorry, one very quick note here just to add. The one thing that you can do here, and this was pointed out to me yesterday, I'm so sorry I can't remember who told me this, but the Winged Warsphinx being 180 points means that you can take 2 Warsphinxes in rare and still take the Casket of Souls, which is 135 points, whereas you can't do double Necrosphinx in rare and also take a Casket of Souls. The downside of that, the reason that I don't consider that to be a major upside, is you can often just take the Necrosphinx in special. So you've got 1 in special, 1 in rare, and then you've still got the 135 point Casket of Souls. But something to think about if, for whatever reason, you want to do double Big Beastie in rare and a Casket of Souls. That is a flexible option that you can go for. Now, on to the spice. This is, in my opinion, incredible. The incantations of the Mortuary Cult are basically bound scrolls. This is a mechanic I believe that was in the game in previous editions. I never played Tomb Kings when I previously played Warhammer Fantasy, or ever really played against them. It was back in the day where you went to your local game shop and you didn't really experience the game outside of the 3 people or 4 people who you played regularly. So definitely a hole in my knowledge. However, they're back and they do work in a very interesting way. I think the way that they work is incredible. There's a lot of upsides to them, and we're going to talk about those as we go through. So, what are these incantations? They're scrolls that you can buy. That's basically it. They're scrolls, they're one-off bound spells that you can buy, but that on its face doesn't sound super exciting. All of the things that they clarify in terms of performing these, every just step of the rules makes me go, oh, this is even better than I thought it was going to be. And then we'll go and have a look at the actual rules themselves, because I think there are some rules in there that are worth putting into every army. Not every army is going to want the same one, but every version of Tomb Kings, in my opinion, has scrolls that are going to be worth putting in, and you're going to be finding points in your character slot to fit them in if you can. So, using incantations. Some characters can purchase incantation scrolls. They cannot be duplicated on the same model, and no two characters in your army can have the same combination of incantation scrolls. What does that mean? These are like dwarf runes. You can't just go, oh, I've got, two runes of fury. Oh, well, that's a bad one because that's an extremely common. You can't go two of the same rune on a dwarf, and also you can't have, for example, two cannons that just have the rune of forging. There we go. That's a normal example. But you could go a cannon with the rune of forging and then give it also the rune of reloading on one of them, so that you've got two distinct loadouts. You can duplicate the actual scrolls that you've got in your list. You just then have to purchase other scrolls. What's interesting about that here is there's only one scroll that is cheap, so it does get a little bit expensive if you're trying to duplicate the expensive ones, but that's not too much of a problem because the cheap one I think is very good. Again, we'll get to those in a second. High priests can have up to 3 scrolls. Fantastic. I don't think I'm ever going to purchase 3 scrolls for a high priest. I think I'm usually going to go one and done. You've got a job to do it. How about we just do that job? But being able to have 3 does give you some flexibility. Mortuary priest can have up to 2, so already even your lower level wizard can have double on these. This is where you might put your duplicate, so you maybe go for your your best one, and then you take the cheap one as well. And then finally, necrotex and arch necrotex may purchase up to 1 incantation scroll. This is great, and there is a very silly thing you can do if you're interested in maybe a big Death Star of melee Ushabti, not something that you necessarily see all the time. They can do that pretty well. We'll get to that in a second. I don't necessarily think it's a super powerful way to play them, but getting your Ushabti up to a 4-up regen does feel pretty good, I think. Performing an incantation. So how does it actually work? Because they are bound spells, but they work in a different way. Unlike most bound spells, you don't make a casting roll. Instead, when you cast the bound spell, you use a leadership test, or you make a leadership test using their own leadership. That's so much better. First of all, you get to re-roll. The way that undead leadership works is that if you've got a BSB, a battle standard bearer, if you're in range of the BSB, any failed leadership roll, you just get to re-roll because they don't have break tests. So in order to make BSBs worth having, they just gave them flat re-rolls on everything. So how often have you seen your opponent fail to res models with, a rise and get some models back or wounds back in their army, and then because they're near the BSB, they've re-rolled and they've got it up again? That's exactly what's happening here. So very consistently going to be going off. If you've got leadership 8, then you know what, I should do the maths. If I remember, I'm definitely not going to remember, I always say this, but I should work out what the odds are of passing it. If you don't pass the test, even with a reroll, don't fear, because if the test is failed, it doesn't consume the scroll, which is wild. It's a once per game item that you just like, oh, I'm always getting value out of it. This is really, really solid. So the actual mechanics is you take the leadership test, you get a reroll on the leadership test if you fail it, if you're within range of your BSB, because that's how leadership works. And then if you passed it, you cast the spell at its given casting value. So there is a slight downside here, which is you're only ever casting at the minimum value. You're not able to use, various mechanics to increase the casting roll. You're not going to roll a double 6 and get like a really good cast, anything like that. So that is a downside to it, but I think that's really not a problem at all, and we'll get into it in a second. If the test has failed, the concentration falters and they're unable to perform the incantations. Cool. Great stuff. That doesn't matter because as we get down here, words crumble like dust. We're just skipping ahead a little bit. You can only perform the bound spell once, after which the scroll will crumble to dust. However, if an attempt to perform an incantation is unsuccessful, it has not been read to its end. In other words, the scroll does not crumble and the character may attempt to perform it in a later turn. This is what I think really makes these so good, because there's going to be key turns to use them, and if it goes wrong, that sucks, but you've still got your magic item to try and do it next turn. There's going to be like a best time to use these once per game buffs, and then there's going to be times that are also still pretty decent a lot of the time. In terms of actual mechanics of casting, there's no risk of a miscast or perfect invocation. Very important, especially if you're playing Mortuary Cult, which is one of the ones that I'm going to be talking about more heavily here. If you're playing Mortuary Cult, having something that gives you a chance to miscast is bad. Obviously, bound spells don't have miscast inherent in them, but it's still just nice that this doesn't tack on, oh, actually, because you're reading it, you've got a chance of miscasting. So great stuff there. And also, when dispelling an invocation, there's no risk of being outclassed in the arts. Just, you know, same as normal bound spells. Then for dispelling, your opponent can dispel the way that they normally would, but they have to roll higher than the incantations given cast in value, which are usually in the 8 or 9 range. So they're not the hardest things in the world to dispel, and if your opponent gets very aggressive forwards with their wizard, it can be a little bit more difficult to make sure that the spell goes off. There are one page. There's only one page. These are the only magic items in the book, but they are very good. So if we go from the top, the one that we're starting with is the one that I think is the best. Now, Scroll of Withering costs you 50 points. It's a hex. Casting value 8. Again, this is a case of do your leadership test. If you pass it, it goes off on an 8. 21-inch range. Until your next start of turn subphase, the target enemy suffers a -1 modifier to strength and initiative. -1 strength at the face of it is already very good. I think this is a good debuff to put on them. I'm not paying 50 points for -1 strength, but this is nice and flexible. And it means that if your opponent's playing a melee army, you're very happy to see this. They also cannot make any ward or regeneration saves, and you can put it into combat. This is incredible. Now, the thing that I'm most excited about here is being able to kill balloons, sky lanterns. This makes it much more consistent for Mortuary Cult to be able to shoot those out of the sky, but it also means, you know, there's a lot of other stuff. If your opponent's got dragons suddenly much more at risk. You know, there's very much a potential for you to just completely snipe dragons out of the sky. As a dragon player, that concerns me, but I think a lot of people are going to leave this scroll on the table and not necessarily bring it, which I definitely think is wrong. Also, 21-inch range, same range as Plague of Rust. So if you're putting this on your Elementalism caster, for example, you're going to be able to, hit them not only with the turn-off Warden regen, you can also cast Plague of Rust, same range, still goes into combat, lower their armor save. You can basically turn one unit into something that's just going to fall over very, very easily, and I think that's very good. A lot of the stuff in the meta at the moment that is good is leaning on ward saves, regen saves. Cathay, balloons. If you've got, you're worried about the Monkey King on the back of Shikengans that is flying around and doing a load of damage, you can turn off their regen save, their ward save there. Dragons, Warriors of Chaos, they've got the triple save dragon. High Elves, they've got dragons that might have 2-up ward saves, Opal Amulets, so they get that 1-up, 2-up ward save to try and protect them. Lots of stuff in the meta is leaning on ward and regen, and this is just an incredible way to deal with them. Now, the problem into a general field is that you might want to use this and then combo it with something that can do well in melee. Graveguard are something that come to mind. They're a unit that lean on their 5-up regen saves, especially in the 1.5 world where you can use a regen to pass your crumble saves. Turning that regen off means that you can potentially bring a lot of force, put it into the Graveguard, and have them crumble very, very aggressively. Now, do Mortuary Cult, which is the army that I think wants to use the Scroll of Withering the most, do Mortuary Cult have a good way to get in and deal with the Graveguard in combat? Kind of not necessarily. So that's something that I'm not 100% sure how it's going to get built around. But I think this is a very good buy, and I'm going to be trying to fit it into all of my Tomb King lists. And I'm going to be very sad if I do have to drop it. 21-inch range as well, worth mentioning. Yes, it's only cast on an 8, so your opponent needs a 9 to dispel it. It's 21-inch range. That means that they're probably, or you can maneuver so it's very difficult for them to be in dispel range of you unless they're getting very aggressive. And again, if we're talking about Mortuary Cult, you're going to want people to move into the middle of the board, so you can just have all of this dead space controlled, where if your opponent does move into the middle of the board to be able to dispel you, maybe you just shoot at the wizard, or, the unit that's bunkering the wizard. Maybe that's where you put some pressure. So I think this is a really interesting way to play, and I think it also probably works pretty well with Royal Host. Royal Host being able to bring those massive, huge units, bring lots of output in terms of characters on dragons, do lots, the Tomb King chariots. I think this is going to be something that will really help them push through, especially in the undead versus undead matchup. This is something that's going to help there. Next up, we've got Scroll of Summoning, and this is one that I'm super excited about as well. So, for 45 points, you get a scroll, which is cast on an 8 if it goes off, 21-inch range again, and the target-friendly unit regains D3 lost wounds, and until your next start of turn subphase, increases your regen save by 1. Wow. That is pretty wild. First of all, being able to heal D3 wounds is incredible. If we think about how much you can heal onto monsters, such as Necrosphinxes, the new winged Warsphinx, the Tomb Dragons, you only ever heal a single wound onto them. Mortuary Cult, obviously, if they are within range of another priest, get to heal +1, but normally you can only heal a single wound. Best case scenario, you heal 2 wounds. This is healing, on average, 2 wounds for 45 points. Also, 21-inch range. You can do this very aggressively far. On top of that, improving the armor value of a regen save is... Whew. Now you can stack this with the Necrotect, the Arch Necrotect, sorry, the one that came in the comes with Mortuary Cult, which gives a number of units, basically constructs, gives them +1 to their regen value next turn. You can stack it with this and you could have 1 turn, or if you bought multiple scrolls across multiple characters, you could have a unit of a Shabti with a 4-up regen save. Is that worth the point? I don't think that. So, is it very funny? I do think so. I think it is very funny, and it's something that I might play around with for a fun game, see if I can make that one work. Yeah, I love this. I think this is really solid. I think this is really solid in Grand Army, where you might have an Armor of Ages dragon who's very hard to kill anyway, and maybe just being able to put the the +1 regen save and heal D3 wounds after it's gone aggressive. Maybe this is turn 4, something like that. It's taken some wounds. You're facing off against something that you're actually a little bit worried about killing you. Fantastic. Let's make that better. Or, you're playing into an army that's got lots of cannons, for example. Turn 1, you fly it up the board, they shoot you with some cannons, you take some wounds, you heal it a little bit, you make it less likely to die to the cannons on the next turn. Then you're going to get in there and cause some issues to them. I think this is a really solid scroll. I'm very, very much looking forward to putting this into more aggressive lists, typically. But again, I'll probably want to squeeze it in. The only thing that's stopping me from wanting to put it into Mortuary Cult lists, with the rest of the stuff I want to fit in there, is points that are already very tight, and Scroll of Withering is already something that I'm going to struggle to justify. I'm putting 50 points worth of scroll in. Do I want a second scroll of Withering, or do I want a scroll of Summoning? Probably neither, but if I wanted a second scroll, it'd probably be the Withering as a duplicate. Moving on to one that I'm a lot less jazzed about, the Scroll of Awakening. For 40 points, you can, once per game, have a magic missile that casts on a 9, so they need a 10 to dispel. It is a long range, it's 27 inches, and it's a small blast template over the center of the target unit, and any model whose base is underneath it risks being hit. Reminder, if you're not fully covered on a 4+, you are hit. A single strength 4 hit at AP2. Now, that is a good spell. If you could pay 40 points to do that every turn, I would do that. Doing it once per game, that feels pretty rough. I don't think I can justify taking a Scroll of Awakening realistically. I think that is, it's just not worth 40 points. I would maybe be paying 20 points for this. Maybe I'm going, I want to run a duplicate. You can't run 2 just like Scrolls of Withering. So I roll 1 with a Scroll of Withering, 1 with a Scroll of Withering, and 1 with a 20-point Scroll of Awakening. I could see that. Here, I don't think this is a magic missile that I'm excited to put into my list. Maybe I'm wrong. Mortuary Cult do typically suffer more against horde armies. They don't necessarily have the tools to get through large numbers of infantry. So maybe this is something that we can see, but I'm still not super convinced, realistically. Then we've got another one that I'm not super jazzed about, but because it remains in play, it's a little bit better. We've got the Scroll of the Outcast Dead. For 35 points this time, we've got a magical vortex that casts on an 8. Casting on an 8 is fine, but if you remember how hard it was to get rid of not Plague of Rust, to get rid of Pillar of Fire pre 1.5, which was cast on a 9, your wizard was usually going to be out of dispel range, so you needed to roll a 10 on the dice. That's not how it works anymore. Now you can, as long as your wizard is within dispel range of the vortex, you're always getting your level to it, so they probably only need to roll a 7 on the dice, and that means that over 50% of the time this is going away. So I'm a little concerned about getting value out of this scroll. How does it work? It's a remains in play 3-inch blast template within 18 inches of the caster, so it's a good flexible spell in terms of the range. 1 in play, it's difficult terrain. It scatters d6 inches, obviously in a random direction, and it hits friends and foes that move through it or that it moves over, and it's a single strength 4 hit at AP2 with multiple wounds D3. If they take a wound from it, they must take a panic test as if they've taken heavy casualties. The last line is the only bit that gives me some pause for whether this is worth putting in. The damage, I think, is poor. It's objectively just bad. It's a single strength 4 hit at AP2 with multiple wounds D3. A lot of things that it's going to hit aren't going to either be wounded easily, the things that D3 wounds are good into. Toughness 6 dragons. Cool. This is going to wound on 6s. I'm not worried about taking a single hit that wounds me on 6s. Or, it's maybe infantry. Okay, strength 4 AP2, wounding on 3s, getting through that armor save. Great. It only does a single wound. There's no D3 there. So it's very low in terms of damage. What you're bringing it for is the panic test. And the reason I think this might be good is I believe that there's a scroll further down that gives a bit of a boost to the necromancy leadership bombing version of Mortuary Cult. I don't think it's the best way to play Mortuary Cult, but if you want to go down the leadership debuffing route, this is something that you might consider putting into your army, because what you want to do is make as many panic tests as possible. You can only take one panic test per phase, but because this is going to be out of the shooting phase, it gives you another avenue for trying to force panic tests, controlling the board, all of that good stuff. It's fine. I think that's the best I can say about it. It's fine. There is a niche time where I can see you using it at least. Scroll of Urgency. This is one of my favorites. So, 30 points, 21-inch range. Again, you're seeing there's a really high range on these. Undead is an army that typically has to bunker together to get value. This is giving you a tool that you can just be like, oh, I can reach across the board and do something. And I think that's really strong. And I think it's something that people have maybe overlooked in terms of evaluating the overall strength of these scrolls. Now, being able to Arcane Urgency is potentially game-breaking. It's such a strong tool. Is it as good now as it was pre-1.5, when you could put a dragon in front of your opponent's unit and say, come at me? No. Objectively, no, it's not. However, you can take a dragon that has an initiative 1 rider, you give the Tomb King a great weapon, and that means that you will be able to attack with your 5 dragon attacks, which means that when you're trying to do combat res, you're probably more likely to do combat res in a challenge there. We can probably bank on about 3 combat res, is my guess. Maybe I need to sit down and do the maths, but I think you can potentially park a dragon in front of a unit of cavalry and not be too worried about being challenged out or something like that. Mostly, though, just having the ability to move a unit a second time is incredible. There are things that this is very, very good on. Some of the things that this is good on include Necrosphinxes and dragons. Anything that can fly, anything that's super mobile, really loves the ability to move a second time. And again, casting it at 21 inches, great stuff. Now, if they try and fated it, which, remember, this is a conveyance spell, so you've already gone through your enchantments, your hexes, and any other conveyances that you want to cast in the movement phase that you have from maybe necromancy or whatever, you can already have cast them. The chance that your opponent has held their fated dispel, words have failed me, the chance that they've held their fated dispel for a spell that you don't even have to cast, because it's a once per game, you're not casting it every turn. If they're holding their fated dispel for you to try and stop you from doing Arcane Urgency or Scroll of Urgency, that's incredible for you. You don't even have to use this. You could just have got all of your spells off in the command phase and feel really good about that. So there's some flexibility there, but you'll know if they've got the ability to fated dispel you. Even though they only need to roll an 8, you don't have to go for it if you're worried that a fated dispel can come in. It's also very accurate or very likely to go off. The main problem with Arcane Urgency is that you have to position where you know that you can definitely move again, because you're only casting it as a spell. Even in pre-1.5, it was cast on a 9, I think it was off the top of my head. You needed to roll a 5. High Elves have an inbuilt reroll. I've failed Arcane Urgency. I've rolled it, failed it, rolled it, failed it. And that was a real problem, because I would usually put my unit where it, you'll try and position it so that if you fail the spell, it's not the end of the world. But sometimes you just need that extra movement. In this case, you're very unlikely to fail it. But also on top of that, because it's not because you know that they will or won't have their fated dispel, you use it when you need to. You know before you move the unit that you're going to Arcane Urgency or Scroll of Urgency whether they've got the Fated left. So I think this is incredible. Even just using it on, like a big Death Star, getting them up the board, I think this is really solid. You can put a Tomb Prince in a unit or a Tomb King, give them My Will Be Done, give them additional movement. Even, regular, let's say you've got a Brack of Skeletons or you've got a brick of Tomb Guard, if you wanted to go down that line, My Will Be Done, get them 6 or 7 inch movement, move them once, Scroll of Urgency them a second time, combo that with the Banner of Rakaf, which gives you the free reform at any point during the movement. Then you reserve move in the shooting phase. You're moving this unit 18 inches with 3 reforms. Unbelievable amounts of movement. Tomb Kings are going to be already, they can move up the board pretty quickly, but they are going to be flying. This is a really, really solid tool to have in your list. Finally, we have got the Scroll of Righteous Smiting. This is the cheapest, and it's one of my favorites. I think it's really strong. I genuinely think it's really good. And it's one that I would probably try to put multiple in. So if I'm playing a list where I maybe want to run Mortuary Priest, Scroll of Withering, maybe I go 1 with Scroll of Withering, 1 with Withering and Smiting, and then 1 Mortuary Priest with just Smiting. So I've got 2 Smitings on there. I think 2 turns of the effect you get from this is probably all you need. More is better, but 2 is good. It's an enchantment that goes off on a 7, self-range, and in your command phase, war machines within your command range can reroll a single artillery die or scatter die per turn. That is very strong. Why is that very strong? There's no engineers for Tomb Kings. So if you misfire, too bad, so sad. Or if you're trying to hit something big like a balloon and you scatter in the wrong direction, or if you scatter but you go a little bit too far, you can use the reroll and try and hit on the target. We're talking about, Cathay is one of the big bads of the meta, but also dragons. Just having the ability to get more accurate with that, using the reroll, making sure that you've got a better chance of bringing to bear your damage on the key turns. So you probably combo the Scroll of Righteous Smiting with the Scroll of Withering, so that the thing that you're hitting has got no defenses. This is really solid. 10 points. This is an auto take if you are bringing Screaming Skull Catapults. If you're not, that's fine. Don't worry about it. But if you are, absolutely worth looking at. Editing Edward here, I realized that I wanted to talk a little bit more about the numbers. I'm not going to go too long on this. This is sort of an after the fact that I'm just adding in. But I mentioned that I was going to talk about how likely you are to get the spells off. If you're casting the incantations with Leadership 7 and you're in range of a reroll, you have less than an 8% chance of failing. That's roughly the same chance of miscasting with a power scroll. So in terms of, am I risking not getting this spell off if my opponent can't dispel? Not really. You're very consistently going to be getting it off 92% of the time. You'll get the spell off if you're Leadership 8. It is a little bit worse if you're Leadership 7, but just make sure you're putting the scroll on your High Priests if you've got them, which you're playing Tomb Kings, you've probably got them. So, other than that, I wanted to have a quick look here at the balloons. And the reason that I'm quite excited is the numbers that the Scroll of Withering let you get to for killing stuff like balloons or the Chaos Dragon, which is basically, for these tests, the same stat line. Your toughness 5, you've got a 4-up armor save, you've got a 5-up ward save, you've potentially got a regen save on there as well. You can play around with some bits and pieces. The numbers are huge. So just very quickly going over what we've got on stream there. Baseline, you're getting 0.33 wounds out of every shot from Ushabti, with no buffs on there. If you're using reroll 1s to hit from Cursed Blades, you're getting an 18% damage increase there. You're probably getting that one off. That's a very consistent spell for you to be able to get off. Then when we look at them with Plague of Rust, that's a 33% damage increased. So suddenly you're getting into really interesting numbers where you're doing over half a wound per Ushabti, which, that's pretty good when you're trying to kill things with 9 or 10 wounds. And also, finally, we get up to, if you look at the Scroll of Withering, and this is Scroll of Withering without Plague of Rust, it's a 48.7% damage increase. That is huge. That is such a big damage increase. Something that I really think is worth considering. I'm not sure that people have sat down and looked at the numbers as to why this is good. So huge damage increases, and obviously, again, just talking about it's the same range as Plague of Rust. Something I didn't mention is if your opponent has got if they've got magic resist, if they've got the Chaos Dragon with magic resist, this spell doesn't care about magic resist because you're not rolling against a casting value. It just goes off on an 8 even if they have magic resist. So really solid stuff there. And then I've got a little chart here just showing you the numbers. So 18 Ushabti, which I think is a reasonable middle ground for Mortuary Cult. Middle ground, that's 3 units, but that's kind of where we see the lower numbers for a lot of Mortuary Cult lists. It's like 18 to 21. So looking at 18, if you've only re-rolling ones and they've got, a 5-up ward save, they've got the 4-up armor save normally, you're doing 7 wounds. As soon as that balloon has got a Meteor Arcane as well as a ward save, you're doing like 6.2 wounds. As soon as you start adding other bits on, Plague of Rust gets you to almost there, 9.3 wounds. That's on average killing the strategist, the 9-wound character. If you've got Withering on there, you're doing 10.5 wounds. And if you've got Withering and Plague of Rust, 14 wounds. That's very consistently getting through a balloon. Anyway, just thought it was worth very briefly touching on those numbers to show why I think a 50-point scroll is worth looking at in a meta where you're probably taking this army because you really want to shoot Sky Lanterns out of the sky. And that takes us to the end of the Tomb King section of Settra's Fury, bar some nice art and a little bit of fluff in the background as well there. I think for what we got, which is not an army of infamy, so we've already got 3 very good ways to play Tomb Kings. Tomb Kings are an army that are already in a spot where they don't feel like they need new ways to play. They're a very expansive army. They're one of the ones, not only one of the strongest, but you've got some of the most diversity in the ways that you can build your lists, in my opinion. I think this addition to them is incredible. It's basically it's just another list of magic items that you are not capped on points in terms of the regular points of the characters that you would spend. Yeah, huge fan of what we've got here, and looking forward to seeing what combinations people put on the table. Obviously, I've mentioned some combinations there. Are there any combinations that you have thought of that you think that you're going to try and put on the table? I mean, if we just go back to it, my favorite one is not the one I think is best. My favorite one is giving Ushabti a 4-up regen. Is that worth doing? Again, no. I think this is really solid. I think it's really fun. Looking forward to seeing it on the tabletop. Let me know what your favorite combo is. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Ground Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.